Hey everyone, welcome to the 114th edition of DF Direct Weekly. This is indeed our weekly show where we discuss the latest gaming and technology news. So much to go through this week, and joining me first of all, John Linneman.
Hey Rich, I can't wait to be on 117 though, because then we can do the real Master Chief, John 117. But 114, still pretty good. Glad we made it here.
Yeah, it's my lucky number. And of course, Alex Battaglia.
Hey there, Rich. Yes, this week I do have a new modem in my house. It is currently working.
Is it modulating and demodulating to within acceptable parameters?
It is good, although the first day it kept going between like 100 Mbps down to like 1,000, like just randomly. So let's just hope it stays.
Alex,
good.
Is it a US Robotics branded modem by any chance?
Yeah.
I didn't actually look at it. It's from Vodafone, so I didn't look, but it's probably bad.
Okay, that just went whoop,
right over the head.
That's okay. You weren't there. You were too young. It's all right. You didn't have to deal with that. External modems.
Let's move on to the first news topic. Okay, so big announcement this week from Sony that Ratchet and Clank, the PlayStation 5 exclusive, is coming to PC, and very soon too, sometime in July towards the end, I believe. And the great news is that developer Nixxes, one of the best porting studios in the whole business, is on the case. And obviously there's been a great deal of discussion about the nature of the port and also the nature of the original game, bearing in mind it was specifically built for PlayStation 5, the quote-unquote power of the SSD, etc., etc. Alex, I'm going to go to you first on this one because this is pretty exciting stuff, but obviously the question has to be asked, is Ratchet and Clank too big for PC?
Well, I mean, the fact that they're porting it already tells us, obviously, no.
Yeah,
but
and basically does
that's
at
the
this
basic
point.
statement there. But I think this is cool for a lot of reasons. One is because the Nixxes, like you described, is doing it. We want them on this project anyway because Nixxes produces quality work, and we are big fans of their work here. And in the last half a year to a year or longer now, we've just been seeing just awful efforts on PC, and given their history, this will probably be quality in a lot of ways. Also because this is Nixxes doing it, they already have experience with the Insomniac engine, and they already have ports of it, multiple ports of their games. So they're working off the basis of the things already done in those previous games, Miles Morales, as well as Spider-Man. So I think we're going to be seeing a lot of the quality of life things that we saw in Spider-Man based upon that press release already. They already mentioned the support for a variety of aspect ratio monitors. So John's monitor supported, for example, really nicely. We've also got most likely the exact same settings menu as well, too. Mm-hmm. Where you can actually change everything in real time. And that's all the great stuff. And coming back to that other question, though, of is this too big for a PC? I think this is an interesting opportunity for Nixxes to do something really cool, where this game, as we know, on the PlayStation 5, it really doesn't look like a game that would run at the same level of fidelity if you tried to put this on something like a PlayStation 4, because you'd have to have both things in memory at that point in time. You couldn't just stream them in. And this is an opportunity for Nixxes to try and push, actually, I think, the PC platform in a cool way. Previously, things on PC have always been doing decompression with the CPU. Their games, Spider-Man does that, for example. And I think there's an opportunity to actually push the PC right now and take advantage of the new direct storage API, being possibly the second game to actually use it in a real capacity, and also use GPU decompression. Which would free up a lot of CPU cycles there to help people with more mid-range PCs, for example, get a really good experience perchance in this game.
Okay, that's interesting. Yes, I do believe, I actually agree with you that they are building on the existing work. I noticed that they're implementing ray-traced shadows as well as reflections. So that's an enhancement that was made for Spider-Man Miles Morales, which wasn't in the PlayStation 5 original, and that enhancement has been brought over to Ratchet, which is awesome. It suggests continuity of work there. We should talk about the whole concept of the SSD being so crucial to this game. Mm-hmm. And I think it's pretty self-evident that it is, but at the same time, it is still a first-generation PlayStation 5 game. It's not maxing out the storage. I mean, we've proven that by actually taping off pins on a PCI Express drive, so it was running at X1 speeds, and the game basically ran almost identically slightly slower loading times. But I think you're right, Alex. It's the concept of the decompression side of things that's going to be most challenging here. Obviously, PlayStation 5 has got that sorted. On the PC side, we've already had what you might call a suboptimal port in the form of The Last of Us Part 1, where the whole decompression side was just offloaded onto the CPU, which caused all manner of problems. So, yes, I'm going to be very interested to see how this is handled. Because in theory, if it's offloaded to the GPU, as you're suggesting, with direct storage, it's happy days, right? Because, well, every mainstream PC out there has a GPU attached.
Yeah, and a pretty powerful one.
It should be.
So
absolutely, certainly for a task like decompression. John, what are your thoughts on this news?
Well, I'm multiple thoughts, actually. I mean, the first being, before we talk about the tech stuff, is just I am actually a little bit surprised to see this game, just like I was with Sackboy, given that I guess it doesn't really seem like a fit necessarily for the PC audience, but I guess the PC audience these days is so broad. I mean, Steam has like 85,000 games on it that, why not? But yes, I am very curious to see it run on here, and I plan to try it out on a 5400 RPM hard disk drive and see if we can throttle it real nicely there. I'd assume though, with enough memory and if it uses GPU decompression, it should actually still work.
Maybe.
I mean, it might be a little bit. I don't know. We'll see. I mean, there are specific games that have, like, you remember Cyberpunk has that hard disk drive mode, right? If you want to use a non-SSD drive, it actually has a setting specifically for that, which is cool. I suspect we won't see that here. In fact, did you guys look at the requirements? Does it actually say an SSD is required?
There's no requirements out yet.
Okay. So we don't know.
Yeah, so it's just a press release at this point.
Well, look, I've got a dead PlayStation 4, right? And I could just whip out the 5,400 RPM drive from that and attach it to a PC and
get some laughs.
However, on the plus side, obviously a lot of the work will be done on the GPU side or the CPU side for decompression. But on the minus side, a key strength of the SSD is basically instant access to any file on the drive, which you will not get with a PlayStation 4
Seek
drive.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's tricky. You'd have to also have a really weak CPU to sort of emulate the kind of horsepower available to a PlayStation 4.
Yeah, I don't think we can look at this as a test of whether it could run on PlayStation 4, right? Even if it functions on that drive. It's a test of the drive, right?
Yeah.
Right. We're just testing the drive, and you'd still have all that other PC hardware going along with it to sort of push through. So that's not exactly a like-for-like test, obviously. I do think this is not a game that could have worked on PlayStation 4 for many reasons. So... and the drive is just one part of that. But yeah.
I think there's, when this comes out, I think there's a lot of interesting testing we can do. I think Rich, because like last time we split it up, where Rich did some like mid-range CPU benches as a part of the video, and I did like the normal port report, and that split up of work really helped us out for that. And I think this time it would really be really fun if Rich, well, alongside maybe if he wants to do GPU work, could also do some really cool, because Rich has way more SSD hardware than I have, for example. He could probably do that a lot better than I could. One thing I'm curious about with direct storage is in the initial implementation presentation that they described for GPU decompression, they mentioned that they think games should actually have a toggle, interestingly, for allowing the user to choose GPU or CPU decompression. Because they presumed in the future people will have really stupidly fast CPUs with tons of cores where this doesn't even matter, so that they would allow the users to just use those cores for something that doesn't affect GPU performance potentially. I'm curious if whether or not this game would even have options like that. One thing, one thing I really thought would be interesting is if they also had streaming speed options. It wouldn't just do some sort of flat speed just as fast as it could, but there would be like a setting, for example, like in The Last of Us Part 1's most recent patch, where they offer in essentially like a streaming cache setting. that the user can toggle. I'm curious to see basically how this is split up in the menu, because in previous Nixxes games, they did some really good split up of things in the menu, like with regards to ray tracing, where you actually have control of how much stuff is in the BVH, which most games don't even allow you to adjust, which is really good, actually. So I'm curious how much granularity there's going to be in the options with regards to any sort of streaming that this game is going to have.
I'm also curious about how, let's say you do have a suboptimal streaming performance on your system, how they're actually going to handle that within the gameplay itself. Like for certain things, you know, certain times the portals actually pull you through a portal, you're in sort of like portal world, and then it spits you out somewhere else. But in other instances, like it's the one planet where you're moving back and forth between two different maps, like you'll be changing the map mid rail grind. So you're like grinding a rail, you hit something, it switches to another map, and then you hit something else, it switches back. And that is actually loading, unloading, reloading, and all that all the time. And it needs to be like perfectly fast. Like if there's any like extra hiccups there, it's going to kind of hurt the gameplay. So I'm wondering if slower PCs with less memory, you know, ones that maybe just can't quite pull it off, what that experience is going to be like.
I guess we'll have to see that. I'm curious myself too, because like I think when you did your video, John, it was like there was like a 50 millisecond frame time spike whenever you would hit like one of those portal buttons. Right?
Correct. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to see if that like frame time spike increases to like 150 milliseconds or something like that if you have a slower PC. Or, for example, if they depending upon maybe they'll scan your system and know whether you have like the ability to stream well or not, and maybe they'll actually shove a whole ton of stuff into memory at that point instead of streaming from the disk.
The thing that's interesting about those is when we talked to them about that game, they actually said that everything kind of loaded faster than the 50 milliseconds, but they just flashed it white very quickly to ensure that there was no visible like pop in. Because if you did it without that, it should almost instantly appear, but you would actually see the assets kind of change, right? And it would look jarring. So that's kind of a baked in, like, sort of flash pause kind of thing to ensure that it doesn't look broken. But if it takes longer than that, maybe they just extend the flash. I don't know. I'm curious.
Man, this is really interesting, right? I think the question is, what are the fallbacks? You know, how do you scale this system down to lower specification PCs, right? Because if you think about it, the benefits of the fixed platform for this particular game are going to be tremendous, right? You've got all of that memory. You've got that extremely fast drive. You've got the decompression engines that basically take care of decompressing all of that data that's coming in. How is all of that going to transfer onto PC where, you know, conceivably you could have, you know, 16 gigs, even 8 gigs of system memory and 8 gig, even a 4 gig GPU. How do you scale all of that back?
4 gig.
How do you make it work?
4 gig, I think, yeah.
I want to see that. I want to see 4 gigs of VRAM running this.
There's got to be a fallback, right? You can't you can't just basically have a massive stutter fest. There's got to be some level of fallback there. That's kind of what Nixxes were the masters of with Spider-Man, right?
Yeah, like you can turn down the texture quality settings in Spider-Man. I even think on the high setting, it still looks really good. It's like higher than it would look on PlayStation 4.
Medium looks great.
Yeah. That's the thing. They actually do scale their settings down well. And I think
that's great.
So like, obviously the thing that's, the reason why the PlayStation 5 needs to use the SSD at all in this game is because it has a limited amount of memory in the first place. And
Definitely.
so they need to have high quality assets. If you just scale the quality of the assets down, for example, textures, which is one of the largest things that are going to be resident in memory, well, then you actually have less streaming to take care of at that point in time. So maybe that is actually the defining factor.
Yeah, Nixxes that's actually one thing that they've done so well that many other PC ports have failed at lately, which is supporting the lower end hardware, especially low VRAM cards, right? As we've seen, though, it's obviously possible. Like, I think you're working on a video now looking at some games that have been updated that at launch did not work well with an 8 gigabyte card, but now they look great.
They look
so
better,
it's like, well, it was always possible. They just didn't implement it correctly in the first place.
So, Alex, I saw this morning that you had to put out a qualifying
Yes,
tweet
I'm
to
sorry.
your Forspoken thing.
Wait, what?
And it seems that people still don't quite get the message. Okay, so I'm going to reiterate it one more time. Okay, it was in my 4060 Ti review. I'm going to reiterate it again now. Point one, there's a massive amount of 8 GB GPUs on the market. So the concept of a game being released that doesn't scale gracefully to 8 GB GPUs, it's a really bad thing. Okay, that's point one. Point two, it's the year 2023. If you're buying a new GPU in the mainstream, the upper mainstream, and beyond that, you really need to be considering buying a GPU with more than 8 GB of memory. It's that simple, because we're leaving cross-gen behind.
Yep.
The target system for a lot of games now is going to be Series X, PlayStation 5, 16 gigs of memory there. Probably about 10 gigs of that dedicated to graphics. On PC, not only do we want to have the same experience as the consoles, we want a better experience. We want to have stuff like ray tracing features, upscaling, all of that has a memory footprint. So therefore, consider the consoles as a baseline and then add your extras on top of that, really. So I think that pretty much sums it up. Is there anything to add to that, Alex?
No,
go ahead.
you said it well. It's just every single time, whenever I talk about games, how they should run on an 8 GB GPU, people always think I'm just like, for some reason, I'm like, every GPU should have 8 GB. That's what I'm saying when I say that.
I think the confusion comes from, it's like people, when you say that, they think, oh, so you're okay with Nvidia releasing new 8 GB GPUs? And it's like, no, it's like there are a lot of 8 GB GPUs out there. That's the point, right? People own these cards. It's not saying, oh yeah, you should go buy one for your next card. It's like, well, there's a ton of them out there. So
yeah, give people good experiences, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
And if possible, and in these cases, it was possible.
Yeah. Which is nice to see.
Yes. And we're actually seeing that because obviously T-Loop 1 has been radically upgraded. And I think based on your recent work for Spoken,
it has a lot of, I'm still not done with that part of the video yet at all, but almost every aspect that I touched on in my original piece so far seems to have seen some improvement in some way that is significant enough to make me think, wow, they released that game unfinished. So...
And there we are. So, Ratchet and Clank coming to PCs soon. We've got a question here from Agsma, supporter question. Hi DF, the news on the latest Ratchet and Clank game getting a PC release got me wondering, what about the rest of the franchise? Not even the 2016 reboot? Do you think Sony/Insomniac considered not worth the effort porting the earlier games on PC, given how accessible PS2 and PS3 emulation has become over the last couple of years? This is a question of return on investment, right?
Yeah.
They're not going to, they're going to plow in the development resources to port over those games, but they probably won't get their money back.
Why?
That's probably
like porting a PS5 game is one thing, is it's very PC-like architecture, but who the heck would want to go back and port a PS3 game? Not to say that kind of work's not being done, but that sounds like not the most enjoyable task.
Yeah, that doesn't sound fun. And John's comment earlier about this not necessarily, he was surprised about this game not being a PC audience-like game, to a certain degree, obviously true. And I think this game has a lot of just like tech hype about it. It's a PS5 game, so people are interested in it. Yeah. But if you go back to like that 2016 game, I don't know what the interest would be there at this point in time.
It's a good game.
It's a good game, but maybe it wouldn't be worth the porting effort. Just wait for PS4 emulation, I guess.
Or just play it on a PS4.
There's an interesting question about, why would you port Ratchet and Clank? And I think there's a couple of good reasons why you would. Number one, a lot of the foundational work in bringing that engine to PC has been done. So why not, get a higher return on that investment? Secondly, further foundational work in how PC is going to handle some of the, dare I say it, bespoke architectural features of the PlayStation 5 to make it work on PC. Key to that is, the SSD and the decompression engines, right? And this is tackling that problem head on. And fingers crossed, based on the T-Loop 1 experience, that work will basically, disseminate across further Sony ports going forward. And hopefully we'll see some good results there. But it's in the hands of Nixxes. Can't think of anyone better to handle the job. I think that's all we've got to say about this one. Let's move on to the next news topic. So it's Computex week, and we've had a bunch of hardware announcements and some software stuff as well. Nvidia released a demo showing an interaction between the player and a game character whose dialogue and facial movements and everything were powered by AI. Very interesting demo. I'm not entirely sure of its practical application within a video game. But John, I'm going to come to you first on this. Thoughts and impressions on this demo, and is it, it was kind of touted as some big new advance.
I mean, they finally caught up to Peter Molyneux's dream of Milo.
They did. Oh my gosh,
it's happening. So Milo is here. I do think this type of thing is at least interesting to look at. It's a fascinating idea, but in terms of how it would actually be implemented in a game, I think whether or not we want that or not, I mean, that's a long way away still, because the things to keep in mind about this demo, first of all, it is obviously just a demo, but let's say you do engage in this, right? Supposedly they are speaking with a microphone to the character, so you need to integrate that into the game, something I don't think most people would want in like a game like this in the first place, even if it were the case.
Well, there's a lot of potential failure points. What if, somebody just comes into the room and talks to you?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. There's that. There's also, I mean, again, AI could potentially solve this, but it kind of brings back the old, cursor problem of, the parser problem of the older Sierra games, right? Where you can just type anything or Zork or something. And that is actually an interesting idea for AI, but still, it does open up potential failure points. But the big issue I see here is it's like, okay, you walk into this bar, you talk to this guy, and he tells you something, and it seems to be setting up the idea that this guy is a quest giver, right? Yeah. So how does that quest get made? And what's the purpose of the AI in that case? It's like, okay, the AI can say that he would like you to do this thing, but he can only really tell you what you can do from a gameplay perspective. Like, a quest has to exist to be handed to the player. Something has to be available for the player to actually engage with, which then gets into, now, how is that made? Are they going to generate quests with AI now? Would that actually be something that's interesting to engage with in terms of actual gameplay? Like, I
don't think they're suggesting that.
No, they're not. They're not suggesting that. They're not suggesting that. It's just like, that's the kind of questions you have to think about, though, when you get to this point. Like, if the AI is generating these things, like, you still need something on the back end for the player to actually do. And so in this case, I think the fact that they set it up as a quest kind of like is a red herring a little bit, and that the better use case for this type of thing, if they wanted to implement this, I think would be like just secondary, tertiary characters that you interact with just, for funsies, so to speak, and they don't have any actual impact on what you're doing in the game. It's just it's an opportunity to give NPCs perhaps more variable dialogue based directly on what's happening. Like, if they're feeding the inputs of like what's happening around you at any point in the game, the scenery around them, where they're at, what they're doing, then potentially they could generate things that are
colorful
more responsive.
Dialogue. Yeah.
Right? Instead of just like
pam pam param, pam pam param, if you ever played Witcher 3.
oh my god, everywhere. Or it's like, do witches it's always like musing over those things, and you hear the same line over and over and over again throughout the whole game, right? That is a potential use case that could be interesting, because otherwise, obviously you need somebody to write that dialogue and then voice it. And I think having humans write and voice things is extremely important for the main stuff. But for tertiary characters just walking around the city, if you want to add a little variety with this kind of technology, then I don't see a problem with that necessarily. I think there's potential there.
But the demo is positing this as like, a character that you have to meet and you have to talk to, and he dispatches you on a quest.
I don't think that's viable anytime soon, and I think that's silly. The way I would rather see it, again, if you take this tertiary character idea, they could add in a system similar to the old Oddworld GameSpeak stuff. You know what I mean? Where it's like you have different D-pad directions or something that sort of determine your approach to that character. You can be angry, happy, whatever. You just express an emotion at the AI, and then it can respond based on that and what's happening around you. That's potentially interesting. But with this demo here, I think this is still very much science fiction, and it just feels like a tech demo for tech demo's sake that's trying to solve a problem that's not really a problem right now.
So
because any kind of quest, the game designer is going to want to craft, and you're also going to want to craft the message to the players in terms of why you're doing the quest. What's the purpose of this? Without that, it kind of removes half the reason for it in the first place.
Yeah, it depends how intelligent the AI is, and what parameters are fed to it in terms of how it responds, right? Mm. I think the main issues I have are, first of all, when you consider how this is done right now, it's done in such a way to funnel you to the correct responses quite quickly.
Right.
And, this interaction that we saw here seemed quite meandering. You could just sit down there at the bar and spend like an hour talking to him, and you might not even know what to actually ask
What's
him.
wrong? Yeah, he sounds sad, but why does he sound sad? Like, who asked these questions?
Yeah, the other thing, of course, is, if he is fully interactive in this way, then people are just going to, just
oh no,
abuse it.
So, it's going to get bad.
Anything.
Yeah. And you're right. There is no indication as to what you should be asking it, right? Like, you could be like, oh, dude, that's a nice that's a nice freezer case back there. You got a lot of cans stored in that thing. Like, what are you buying? Who's your supplier? Where do you get that stuff? How much you paying
just
per
makes
can?
up everything at this point.
Just go for it.
Yeah. So one thing I think, actually, so there are some game types, like I'm thinking about like Fallout 76. I'm thinking about like Star Citizen. I'm thinking about games that have kind of Fallout 76 is maybe not the best example, but EVE Online, where there's like breathing, living worlds technically outside of the realm. It's just like there's like this entire metagame there. And in games like those, to have the AI in the game not just be like static entities that just do the exact same thing every time, this would be actually really good tech to implement there, because in games like that, there's like, for example, like a battle going on in one area of the game world. The AI could be fed that information and know it and comment on it as you walk by. And then you could get a chance to hear about it, for example, and then maybe want to go off to that area and shoot other players too, whatever. So like, I think there is some tech usage here, but the idea of it being like it's feeding you mainline quests or even secondary quests sounds a little bit intense, because a designer would still have to set that up in some sense of the word. So
what if they made a game that's like you play as like a Blade Runner and you have to go around and find the AI characters and then, retire them, and the gameplay devolves into using like detective vision to examine their hands, like, oh, that thumb's going through the belt, you're an AI.
Yeah. Why not? Let's do some fun stuff with that.
Well, the possibilities are endless. The arrow to the knee guy in Skyrim, the arrow could go anywhere at this point.
Yeah. Imagine if he says the arrow in the knee and then he like utters something under his breath as you pass by to let you know that he's an AI. Just, a scripted thing.
The rendering was pretty impressive on this demo, right, Alex?
Yeah, this was using the newly minted Unreal Engine 5 branch from Nvidia, where it's kind of like with the UE4 branch that Nvidia had, they were originally pushing things like DLSS in it, extended ray tracing features like RTX GI. But with the advent of UE5, it kind of made them want to push in a slightly different direction. Like I think they deprecated RTX GI for UE5 because they think Lumen is high quality enough at a performance cost that is reasonable. So they kind of are now pushing more towards this path tracing paradigm that we saw in Cyberpunk 2077 Overdrive, where this demo uses RTX DI, which is all the primary lighting from the direct lighting is going to be ray traced at that point, which is super expensive. And it's also why this demo looks so darn good. Every light shadow casting. It looks really nice.
Okay. Anything further to add to this? I think we've pretty much covered that. There's so much going on at Computex this week, but this was kind of like the key announcement that caught our eye. But actually, while we're here, let's talk about something else that was announced, which is Nvidia's ULMB2 monitor reveal. Potentially really exciting stuff. John, clue us in as to what this is all about.
So ultra low motion blur is it's basically a method for strobing the backlight in an LCD monitor to improve motion clarity. It's designed to bring that motion closer to, I would say, a CRT level, but just to eliminate all the blur that you get, like between persistence blur and the response time of the pixels, similar to black frame insertion on an OLED screen. The problem is like, I feel like Nvidia, they launched that in like 2015, right? Like it's been a while, the original ultra low motion blur,
wow,
but it kind of depreciated, I think, at this point, as most monitors either don't support this type of technology, or if they do, it was only with VRR disabled, with a few exceptions, as far as I know. That's just off the top of my head. So ultra low motion blur 2 seems to be designed to increase the brightness when using this feature, and also improves motion clarity to the point where it's like equivalent to 1000 hertz, which is where you start to get to the point that you're getting that true CRT like motion quality, where there's just no persistence blur. There's no blur at all. Everything looks extremely sharp. They're suggesting that it can get over 250 nits of brightness with this enabled, which is actually pretty impressive. That may sound low in this world of HDR, but a 250 nit panel is perfectly usable and quite bright and pretty normal for like an average LCD. But you're getting that with extreme motion clarity, and it can do so at the monitor's full refresh rate. And it seems to be possible with VRR G-Sync being enabled at the same time. So this is kind of the dream for me. Although there is still potential to go further with this technology, I think it's a good sort of starting point for like the next generation of this. Mm-hmm. I think ultimately the better solution would be, at least on the PC side, is to push frame generation up to the next level and generate upwards of like 1,000, 10,000 frames, something like that, which sounds absurd, but I think if we can get there, the motion clarity will basically be like retina quality. It's the kind of mimicking what your eye sees in real life. And that's ultimately the goal, to get to that level of clarity.
Yeah.
And, we still have a long way to go, and I have not seen ultra low motion blur 2 yet. And I need to do more, research on it to see how it ends up working. But everything I'm hearing thus far suggests that this is potentially a real game changer for anyone, I suppose, that values motion clarity, because even right now, like natively without something like ultra low motion blur or black frame insertion, all these flat panels that, due to persistence blur, especially, they exhibit motion blur in motion. And you can even see it right on your Windows desktop. If you bring up a page of white text in your web browser and slowly move the window around your screen, try to focus on the text. And you'll notice that as soon as it starts moving, it becomes sort of a blurry mess, right? And you got to move it kind of medium speed. If you just move it real fast, whip it around, you get a different effect. But if you just move it nice and slow, you'll see it. Or you can use Blurbuster's Test UFO program, which is always really useful for very precisely examining the detail. That little graphic is designed to test this specific use case with the little tiny per pixel details within the Test UFO. If you're losing motion clarity, you'll notice that it just kind of blurs together. And that's what we want to eliminate. So,
yeah, I've been looking at the Nvidia post about this, John. There's a couple of firmware updates available for an Acer and an Asus ROG Swift monitor. Looks like it's 1440p 360 hertz screens that are supported to begin with.
It's a bit
27 inches.
It's a bit small for my taste, but I still want I want to test this. I want to see how it works myself. And apparently, like, you can really dial it in to avoid like any sort of crosstalk, which would cause sort of like a double image effect or trailing. This is designed hopefully to eliminate or massively reduce all of this stuff. So, if this lives up to what they're promising, this will be insane. It's just, currently available monitors are all small.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's also limited to the G-Sync module monitors. Obviously, this is one thing to also mention. So
there's another couple of monitors coming. A 25-inch 1080p 540 hertz screen. That's an Asus ROG Swift. And there's an AOC Agon, another 27-inch 1440p 360 hertz screen. Apparently, you do need to disable G-Sync to get this to work.
Wait, really?
Yep. But when your screen is updating at 360 hertz or
The
540,
division's not bad actually at that point.
the judder shouldn't.
Yeah,
be
the problem though is
bad.
that I find that judder becomes infinitely more noticeable on a low persistence display, even when the little frame time skips are very, very tiny. You just detect that something's a little bit off. Now, I haven't seen this in motion, so I can't say that for sure, but even when you're at like 160 frames per second, right? Or you're targeting 160 hertz on like a CRT monitor, for instance, and your game is like 150 frames per second, you can absolutely still notice that it's not completely synced to the refresh rate, right?
Okay.
That becomes much more noticeable on a low persistence display, which is what you're basically getting here. So I'll have to test that as well. That's just, okay, they specifically list it as G-Sync Ultra Low Motion Blur 2, which made me perhaps think that you could do it with, because it is possible. I believe some monitors can do this, and I know LG on the CX, they kind of have a bug where if you do 120 hertz Dolby Vision input, you could leave VRR enabled even with black frame insertion, and it actually did work. It's just if it dropped below a certain level, the flickering would become like dangerously stroby and potentially cause seizures for some people. Like, no joke,
great.
It's bad. It doesn't. You have to stay over that certain threshold. It's like 90 frames per second. Anything under 90, and it flickers horribly, but it does work. So
Nice.
You had me at dangerously, John.
yeah.
Anything more to add on this one's potentially very exciting, but I agree with you, John. I'd like to see larger screens and more screens supported, but it does look as though this ultra high refresh rate is kind of mandatory for this, which is going to limit application, right?
Yeah. You need a lot of
Yeah,
frames.
I mean, this still feels like this technology is just targeting esports men, which is a bummer because this should benefit everyone, right? And I don't think people realize what they're missing until they see a low persistence display in action again. It is the single most important thing I think that displays need to improve on at this point, because it's a game changer. Just in terms of what you can see, it completely transforms. I mean, you guys know you're using OLED panels with 120 hertz black frame insertion support.
Yeah.
And you know what that looks like. That looks unbelievable. It's extremely clear in motion. And yeah, I don't know. We'll see.
Well, it's early days.
It is.
We'll just have to see what happens here, but it's certainly exciting progression.
I guess the final comment is just, I am happy that Nvidia hasn't given up on this, and they are specifically still targeting this technology and this concept, and that I was starting to get worried that this was going away because you see it less and less in new monitors. Even LG's been rolling it back in their OLED TVs. All the latest models don't support 120 hertz BFI anymore. I mean, again, BFI is not the same as ultra low motion blur 2. It's just designed to do a similar thing, but it just kind of feels like it's disappearing slowly. So that the fact that they're bringing this back gives me some hope that it will become a more important, prominent thing again.
Okay, fair enough. Let's move on to the next news topic. And this is an interesting one. So the Dolphin emulator guys pitched Valve to put Dolphin onto Steam. It seemed to be going ahead, and then suddenly it didn't go ahead. And there was initially talks about DMCA takedowns, which turned out to be nonsense. From what we can gather from one of the Dolphin developers, it seemed to be the case that Valve just got in contact with Nintendo saying, "Are you cool with this?" They said, "Nah." So it didn't happen. Since then, various reasons have emerged as to why it didn't happen, and there are some potentially worrying implications, possibly for emulation in general, possibly not. John, do you want to take this one up?
Yeah, so this is, we don't yet know where this will lead or whether it will actually lead to something, but it has been discovered that Dolphin uses the Wii common key. So they are actually using effectively Nintendo property in the emulator, and a developer working on Dolphin directly admitted this. I mean, it's an open source emulator, right? So anybody could have found this, I'd assume,
including Nintendo.
Including Nintendo,
Control
right?
F
So this
that.
is nothing new, but it's now more prominently out there in a way that concerns me, where knowing Nintendo's history with this sort of stuff, it feels like we're in that territory where if they wanted to take action against someone or something, they might actually have a leg to stand on. Whether they'll do it or not, I can't say. But it does, from the outside at least, feel as if Nintendo doesn't much care for emulation, except for their own solution to emulation, right? They don't want people emulating their games in what they deem an illegal. Well, it is technically illegal, yes, to download ROMs and use them, but emulation itself has been ruled not illegal, right? Provided that they're not using any sort of copyrighted code or a common key like this within the emulator itself. But once you start to use their actual intellectual property or in the code or within the emulator itself, that's a real problem. And I think in this case, just removing it is what's going to happen. For one, people have to provide their own. But I do wonder if Nintendo actually has a case in terms of going after Dolphin developers. I hope not, but that's the kind of stuff I'm worried about. And I don't want them to further increase their attack on emulation.
Yeah.
Which it kind of feels like, if they start down that road, how do you beat Nintendo's law team on this stuff, right? It's not a road you want to go down.
I'm just struggling to get my head around the concept that a decryption key is actually copyrighted.
Who knows, man? Rich.
You're right. I don't know. Maybe
if,
not.
Is the decryption algorithm literally the same code that is used by the Wii? I suspect not. So I think there's a lot of grey area here. And the way it's typically got around is, simply people dump BIOSes. They don't supply the BIOS with the emulator. You have to, in theory, dump your own BIOS.
Or reverse engineer it. That's also possible.
Mm-hmm.
Well, some might say that's what's been done here, but it's still going to require the same cryptographic key.
I guess that's true.
So silly.
But it is basically moving in further into a grey area, I guess, which is where Nintendo has basically constructed its argument. Now, I think the point is that Dolphin has been around for many, many, many years, and for a long time has included that cryptographic key, and Nintendo hasn't done anything. Maybe it's the move to Steam, legitimizing that as on a mainstream platform that has got Nintendo concerned here. I don't know.
I mean,
I guess
it's been in there, but we can't say for sure whether Nintendo. I mean, you would think they have done their due diligence and looked into this, but maybe they just haven't, and it's sort of like, they just dumped it in that bucket of, well, this is just happening, and now perhaps this gives them a reason to investigate more closely. I don't know.
Grudge.
Well, there's been a lot going on in terms of reverse engineering, in terms of companies taking legal action against people doing this kind of thing. And it's becoming a bit more pervasive in recent years, although it seems that the legal arguments were settled some years back that emulation is perfectly legal.
Yep, good.
I guess my concern is that prodding the wasp's nest could actually see a regression of those hard-won victories for emulation.
That's
the concern.
Yeah. Any thoughts on this one, Alex?
No, I'm just a big fan of emulation, so I'm pro Dolphin, I guess I'll say. I'm pro Dolphin.
I feel like between this and, people like flaunting, like, hey, we're running Tears of the Kingdom on our PCs now, like right at launch. That's what I would consider poking the hornet's nest.
Yes, that is problematic for sure.
So
I don't really know what to say about that, but it's not good.
Yeah.
Okay. I think there's not really too much more to add to that at this point, but I think the initial reporting was off beam in that there was talks of, DMCA takedowns. There's nothing of that sort. It was literally Valve, quote unquote, reaching out, which usually means sending an email, possibly a phone conversation, to figure out whether they were cool with this happening, and they weren't. And that was the end of it, really.
You make it sound so unexciting when I was trying to imagine, Doug Bowser getting in a room with Gabe and they're just like hashing this out. Like, look, we want to put the simulator on Steam, but we want to check with you guys. And Doug Bowser's just kind of like, But unfortunately, I'm sure it was just an email.
I imagined actually like a
Yeah.
klaxon blaring out and red lights flashing as soon as the first upload happened on Steam, and then Gabe Newell himself called Nintendo HQ in Japan with fluent
direct-
Japanese.
Actually, oh yeah, okay, there you go.
This is how it all went down. So.
I suggest it probably would have been an interaction between two sets of
Yeah.
legally minded suits.
Yeah.
Probably.
That was that. Okay, well, that's the end of that one then. Let's move on to our next news topic. So, obviously, we've covered Redfall recently. The game didn't launch in a particularly impressive state on either Xbox Series consoles or PC. Work is ongoing to get those games into shape. Report this week from Jason Schreier of Bloomberg suggesting that the ramifications of Redfall's development have been pretty devastating to the developer, Arcane Austin. I'm going to come to you again on this one, John, because, obviously you've been particularly vocal about the transition from single-player focused developers to games as a service. It's failed on multiple occasions now.
Oh, yes.
Redfall looks like the latest casualty. And we're reading reports here that up to 70% of the staff actually departed rather than working on a multiplayer game of which they had no interest.
Yeah, that seems to be the takeaway here. Is I've posited in the past that studios like this perhaps did not want to create a game like this. They didn't want to make a multiplayer shooter. That's not why people would join Arcane. But of course, we had no real way to know that for sure. And it seems through Jason's investigation that there is now information out there suggesting that a large chunk of the staff left during development, which sort of supports the notion that perhaps they didn't want to work on this sort of game in the first place. And it does seem to, and I also had previously noted that the push for this likely came from upper management at ZeniMax, Bethesda, to pursue monetization in games. And that's potentially where we saw Fallout 76 and Wolfenstein Youngblood come from. Fallout 76 has become its own thing, but it launched terribly. I think Youngblood was largely considered a failure, as is Redfall, on that front.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like there was actually more focus on monetization in Redfall initially, and that was even pulled out, so it could have been worse. But the thing that surprised me is the relationship that they sort of spelled out. So this seemed to be completely a Bethesda game, Microsoft hands off. And I think this is actually an interesting challenge that Microsoft has faced, because when you're acquiring so many studios, I do think you want to ensure that the company culture can remain intact, and you want a certain level of autonomy, right? But in this case, it feels like there was a disconnect between what the developers doing the work wanted and the upper management at Bethesda. And that created a conflict where, yes, Bethesda was given autonomy in this case, but the freedom that they were allowed only really seemed to apply to the upper management, managing this game, right? And it might have worked out better if Microsoft came in and somehow were informed of what was going on at the lower level in terms of, hey, we don't want to make this type of game. And the fact that now that it's owned by Microsoft means that it should be more viable to not make that sort of game, right?
With Game Pass.
Right. With Game Pass and other avenues, they don't necessarily need to make this monetization heavy multiplayer looter shooter thing. And I'm a little bummed out that didn't happen. But it does seem like, based on that interview with Kind of Funny and Phil Spencer recently, it does suggest that they are starting to take more of a closer eye on this. And he does sort of express regret over not more closely monitoring the Arcane situation, getting behind this. But the whole thing is definitely on Bethesda itself rather than Microsoft. Well, at least 90% of it, we'll say.
You were talking about elements being removed from the game. To what extent were they removed, and to what extent do they remain?
So Jason's article seems to suggest that there was more of a focus on cosmetics and monetizing things for players, basically like an in-game store where people spend real money on stuff. That's kind of what I gathered from the article. And that stuff is not there really. So at least they kind of pulled that out, which is good. But it also sounds like throughout development, there was a lot of confusion over what they were actually making. You see terms like Borderlands thrown around, or it's like, so are we making like Borderlands, or are we doing something else? Or it seems like there was just so much uncertainty in terms of the design that it didn't really coalesce into what they kind of wanted. And that's an interesting point, because we do know from historical lessons of developers working on actual immersive sim games is that sims do actually, unfortunately, many of the best ones came together in the last months of development.
Yeah.
So, right. That's not necessarily the best strategy, I would say, but that does seem to have been a reality in many cases. And in this case, it just didn't work out. And I think that's just, you lose that much staff. You're switching engines to Unreal Engine to do an online thing that I suspect not everybody on the team was exactly happy with either. And it's just going to be, those who remained, plus trying to get new recruits on board, all that kind of stuff. And it just becomes a challenge. And thinking of recruiting people, another point that he pulled out from this article that I liked was, we've often complained about developers announcing games too early in the development cycle with like a CG trailer, right? This makes sense when you think about it, is that secrecy likely makes it much more difficult to recruit people these days. You know what I mean? It's like if you're building something interesting and you announce, hey, we're working on this, like Crisis 4 is an example of this. They announced Crisis 4 and they were basically like, hey, we're hiring. And that's what they're doing, right? Like they're working on that game, but by showcasing it early, it immediately gets the interest of potential people to come work on the project. And that's good from a talent perspective, especially if the project itself, if by announcing it that early, that means that these guys that they could potentially recruit will actually have a real genuine say in terms of the direction of the project, right? It's not so far along that they can't change direction. It's like, no, this is a chance to get in at the ground level and make something. And so that kind of put that part into perspective, which was interesting. So I don't know, man. The whole thing is just a bummer. And then of course they brought up Prey, because Prey, when it was decided to work on Redfall, Prey had been a commercial failure. And I feel bad about that, because one, I actually think that's partially on Bethesda themselves, because the marketing campaign around Prey was terrible. Like it was genuinely bad. I think they didn't properly represent what the game was. They didn't sell it very well. Like they should have been looking back at how 2K sold BioShock and try to channel that somehow.
Yeah, right.
That got people excited. And that's basically what this is. Prey is a more advanced take on the immersive sim, more in common with typical immersive sims, whereas BioShock's somewhat simplified, but I still think they could have sold it better. I think Rich was pulling what little hair remains out over that campaign with the not a mimic thing, if you remember, where there's just memes everywhere and like ad stuff for like, oh, not a mimic, and that got real old real fast. So that sucks. And then also it launched in kind of a bad state initially on consoles, if you recall.
The control issue.
Super bad control lag. The demo didn't show well. The initial demo was the intro, which is very cool as an introduction, but it doesn't actually represent what the rest of the game is.
No,
right?
It's so different after the intro.
Like the intro is intended to make players, it's intended to sort of confound players and make them think one thing when it's the other, which is very cool if you've already invested in the game. But as a demo, it's not the best choice, because it's like, what is going on here? They should have picked a better section to allow the player to better understand what the gameplay actually is. So there's fault there as well. And it just seems like this perfect storm of project failed. Bethesda wants monetization. They want multiplayer. They want live service, all these things coming together. And they just kind of got thrown into this, like, onto this project that none of them wanted to do. And that sucks, because the themes and ideas of Redfall are really cool, right? This could have been an amazing single player immersive sim if they had been allowed to make that game. But clearly, yeah, it's too late for that. I just hope from all of this that Arcane is able to pull themselves back together, recruit people either back or find new talent, basically get the studio back on track to make what it's good at, and find ways where hopefully Microsoft can then come in and help leverage their power to better market the game, find a topic that maybe is more appealing. Like, there are ways to make this work, and I really hope they find it.
Yeah. Agreed.
Wow. Nothing further to add there, Alex?
No, I hope Redfall sees some improvement soon enough on the technical front. Then we can start talking about what the game is.
Well, I mean,
the transition to Unreal was unfortunate because, say what you will about Prey, but it was technologically distinctive.
Oh yeah, and on a PC it was just godlike on
awesome.
release. It was so awesome on release.
It's also good on Xbox now. Remember, they added in the FPS boost, so it's 1440p 60. The loading times are short now on Xbox Series X.
Right.
It's actually awesome on Xbox at this point, which is great.
Awesome. Okay, well, let's move on to our final news topic. Again, this one comes out of Computex, and it's something that we've been eagerly awaiting for, 3 years now, which is the announcement that HDMI 2.1 specification capture cards are coming, except they're not. Basically, it seems to be the case that they're going to be accepting an HDMI 2.1 input, which is to say you can feed them 4K at 120 hertz, you can feed them VRR, etc., but ultimately your captures are still going to be at 60 frames per second, which means that for a lot of content creators such as us, the utility there is fairly limited. I guess there is some
streamers
advancement there.
It's about streamers.
But yeah, we're also
who else
also going to be seeing
though? Like, Rich, if you think about it for a second, it's who needs to capture 4K 120 besides like us, maybe like VG Tech or similar types of niche channels. But like the average person doesn't need that, I guess.
No, absolutely not. That's the issue, right? And I think that's why we're getting products like this, which is that, as Alex just said, they enable streamers to run full HDMI 2.1 spec and to be able to beam out the
signal,
a capture,
right?
Of some
something.
Yes,
we'll talk about that.
And I was also going to say that it looks like 4K 60 over USB is now possible using these new devices. I think
cool.
The first one is from Ava Media. But yes, the quest for 4K 120 hertz capture continues. So Alex, you've obviously been waiting for this for a long time. You're still waiting.
I'm still waiting. The reason is because I actually want to finally show DLSS 3 in a video. I want to show VRR in a video in some way eventually. I want to be able to record VRR eventually. And
wait, how do you show that though?
I don't know. We offer a download of a variable FPS video.
Yeah, but is that even possible?
Variable FPS video?
Variable frame rate playback is possible, but the question is whether the player will actually kick into a VRR mode to display it properly.
Yeah, which players even support that?
I don't even know off the top of my head.
Whether the desktop does it, I don't know.
Because, right now, I would say video playback, just a quick rant, video playback sucks on the PC. It still sucks. It drives me, I just want smooth, perfectly paced video playback, and no PC player can do it. They all have issues with this. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Oh,
I
know
terrible.
Exactly what you're talking
They're
about.
all like this. I don't get it. Just play the
video without dropping it. Die on
play
the frame.
It correctly. Play it correctly. I don't understand.
It's pretty bad how awful that is. But the whole point is, I want at least the ecosystem to start evolving in that direction of allowing for VRR, allowing for variable refresh rate and 120 hertz at a high resolution. And this, unfortunately, just doesn't bring us anywhere closer to that, because Rich has talked about before, you can technically do this already to a certain degree without the pass-through part for 120 hertz at 4K with the Elgato 4K 60 Gamer Mark II or something it's called? What's it called?
Yeah, well, basically the capture card you've got supports VRR now, the PCIe Express one, but I think the one you're referring to might well be this, the HD60.
Oh, yeah, that's what I'm sorry. That was a mistake.
But I tried it, and essentially if you feed it a VRR feed and you capture that feed, it looks really juddery and not great. So I don't really see the utility of this for VRR content. Also has VRR logging. It sort of logs frame rates at a period of maximum like 16 milliseconds, but it won't tell you whether that frame is longer due to low frame rate compensation. There's a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, VRR is something we're going to have to tackle sooner or later to actually produce metrics that do represent what VRR actually does for you as a gamer. The current system is to point a camera at a screen, which isn't ideal. Get some idea of the fluidity, I guess.
It's possibly better than capture in terms of presenting the
Probably
visuals,
is
though,
better
because
than capture.
It will
the
be.
frames sort of blend together, which gives you some idea of it.
Yeah. That is a better way of doing it than capture. But at the same time, you're not getting accurate frame time analysis there. So, I mean, our use case scenarios for a 2.1 capture card are entirely different to basically anybody else, apart from VG Tech, perhaps.
I mean,
Yeah, I know.
the thing for me is, and Alex, I think, is that we just wanted a solution where we could leave all of the nice features on while playing the game for capture, and still get good footage at the end. Because right now, a game comes out, I would like to play it in HDR. I would like to play it with, 120 hertz enabled or any other features, VRR and all that. But we never get to do that. We have to play it in 4K 60 SDR at best.
Yeah.
And that's how we spend a lot of the time playing the game during the coverage. And it's not the best. It kind of ruins the presentation a little bit for us personally. Not that would be enough for a company to say, yeah, okay, we'll sell you this product just so you can enjoy the game a little bit more during the capture session, right?
You 3 to 4 people. Yeah.
I mean, the big problem seems to be cost of components and even potentially component scarcity. Like getting the hardware necessary to do this seems expensive and difficult.
I'd pay for it.
Whatever. Yeah, I agree. And also, you notice this is a PCIe X4 slot.
Gen 3,
right?
too.
Gen 3,
also,
Gen 3.
which is
So it's slow, and I suspect that feeding 4K 120 hertz video through that wouldn't be feasible at that speed. Because right now, like I've noticed when I've had too many cards in my machine and it sort of throttles the bandwidth in those slots, it really messes up 4K 60 when it's just, so
Yeah.
That's a big ask.
Well, the wait continues. In terms of VRR, I do think there will be some solution that we'll be able to eventually come upon, but there has to be a compromise because ultimately you can't present VRR content on a non-VRR screen on a non-VRR playback platform.
Yeah, no.
So I'm thinking it's probably going to be some kind of conversion of VRR to VSync off, which means they'll be tearing, but at least we'll be able to measure the frame times properly then.
That'd be interesting.
Yes. But that's it. That's the last news topic we've got to discuss this week, and we're going to plow on to supporter Q&A. This is where every week we ask our supporters to throw up whatever questions they like, and we choose the best of them, or rather the questions that we're most
entertained by.
Wait, Rick,
entertained by.
I don't see agonizing rectal pain on here.
They've gone back.
They didn't.
Hiding.
Gone back into hiding.
Oh.
First question here, this one from OCD Dev. OCD_Dev. Hi DF, just curious what your predictions are for the Xbox showcase next week. What would you like to see? What are you expecting, both good and bad? Anything tech-wise you hope to see pushed? Just curious to know, as I think it would be interesting to cross-compare the team's thoughts from before and after the showcase airs. Alex, I'm going to go to you first. What do you expect to see? I mean, obviously we're going to see Starfield because they've said we're going to see Starfield. Forza Motorsport, going to be seeing that because it's not so far off completion. Well, answer the question from OCD_Dev here.
I think we're going to see a Fable little bit of gameplay tease. I think we're going to see a teaser trailer for the new Indiana Jones game from Machine Games. This is all bullshit, by the way. I don't actually know anything. I'm just saying what I think. Those are things I would like to see. But just because John always says this, we're going to get an Elder Scrolls Online video in there too. It's a Microsoft. We're going to get.
Oh, come on! I hope not.
We're going to get another. It's going to be another expansion pack coming out.
Okay, John, thoughts?
So I do think it's going to be a big show with a lot of stuff shown, because you look at the Xbox people online and they are dancing in this right now, right? They know the response to the Sony show. and they wouldn't be out there celebrating or like publicly, you know, getting people hyped if they didn't have a lot to show. I would say, like, maybe they will not hit the mark, but I think they at least know that they have a lot to show. And they were the ones that have been the brunt of the criticism over CG trailers and stuff for years, right? Because they were the most guilty of it. And I think the developer direct earlier this year shows that at the very least they're like, okay, we will try to cut down on that where possible. It's not always possible, but I think they probably keep that in mind in terms of we can't just do tons of CG trailers anymore, but we'll see if it plays out. I really want to see some of the games that have been in development for a while, like, actually show up. Like, if they came out with, like, say, a Perfect Dark demo and like really showed what the game is, what they're trying to do with it, and like really sell people on it, that would be a gigantic thing. And I really hope that happens. Fable as well. I mean, Fable is really interesting because I don't actually like the old Fable games. I never did.
No.
But I freaking love Playground games. Their stuff is so freaking good. And, you know, taking this to a new studio, I have a fairly confident feeling that it's going to be different enough and interesting enough that it's going to be something I'll really enjoy. So I really want to see that and actually see what they've been working on for all this time. Avowed would be nice. You know, that was announced a long time ago, so we haven't seen much on that. Basically, if they can bring all the stuff that they've announced and actually show the games, that alone would be huge. If they want to sprinkle in some new teasers and announcements as well, that would be nice. But just show their wares, show the stuff they've been working on. Maybe tease something from the Coalition. I don't know. Like, they're doing Unreal Engine 5. And we saw that tech demo from them a while ago. If they were able to show some real-time visuals of their next game running on Xbox, you know, with UE5, I think that could potentially blow people away visually. I think that's what we want. We want to see both game concepts and visuals that just like really impress, rather than just a bunch of multi-platform stuff and CG trailers for games as a service.
Yeah, I guess there's speculation on one side, and then there's basically
I know. It's not
the fake insider reveals on Twitter.
This is none of this is insider reveal. This is just hopes and dreams.
But it's getting a bit silly now,
Hopes
isn't
and
it?
dream.
It's to the point now where, for example, there was a story that CD Projekt Red was going to get acquired by Sony.
Oh my god!
And it was just complete nonsense. You know, anybody would know that it is complete nonsense. But it required CD Projekt Red to actually produce an official denial that this was happening. It just seems to be silly season on Twitter whenever we're in this kind of time of the year. And it's all about acquisitions, as though acquisitions is actually like awesome.
I'm so tired of this talk around it. Acquisitions.
The thing about acquisitions is that, you know, I think the reason why people are excited about it is because of this sort of partisan console stuff. And it's the concept that some other guys might not be getting the games that they're getting. It's really quite pathetic.
It really is. One more game, though, to mention that I would like to see is a Stalker 2. Since it seems like they have continued to make progress on it, and despite their difficult situation, and I feel like it could be a real celebration point if they're able to come out swinging and show the game, you know?
Yeah.
So I really hope that those guys, that they can make it.
Let's move on to the next question. This one from Padster in block capitals. Padster. Hi DF team, is XMP necessary for DDR5 RAM? Does it make that much of a difference in gaming performance, whether it's running at 48, you put 48 hertz here, I think it means megahertz, 48,000 megahertz, or in my case, 6,000 megahertz. I'd rather my RAM be stable if it means that overclocking it doesn't really deliver any real in-game benefits. Same question applies to the Intel Extreme Tuning app / tool. I play on an ultra-wide 1440p screen powered by RTX 4090 i9 64 gigs DDR5.
What a PC.
I can answer that one.
Wow.
Yeah, what a PC. You know, holy crap. To answer the question, yes, you should be using the XMP profile because otherwise you'll have higher latencies, most likely, and also, lower frequency. And what that means is that when you're CPU bound, which is happening even for i9 owners, especially if you've got a 4090, that basically will be limiting your performance. I've been doing some memory testing recently, and the difference between speeds can be, can add like 10 to 15% CPU performance, which is nuts. But yes, you should be using XMP.
I have a question for you guys, because I have not been fortunate enough to test DDR5 at all. My board does not support that. But with XMP disabled on DDR4, it was always just, it would drop it down to like 2100 megahertz. And that was it. You needed XMP to actually get the proper speed of the RAM. How does DDR5 behave?
It starts at 4800 megahertz,
okay.
I believe.
Yeah, that's like XMP is also like semi-supported, right? Isn't that the official line regarding XMP, Rich?
There's a lot of issues here in that, let's say you've got an Alder Lake chip, for example, and you've got, 7,000 megahertz RAM. The Alder Lake memory controller may not be fast enough to run it at that speed. So it is slightly problematic. But I would say at 6,000, it shouldn't be a problem. And you should be invoking it for lower latency and higher bandwidth. And, Jedi Survivor, Redfall. I mean, you've got a 4090, so you're kind of insulated if the game supports DLSS3 to a certain extent. But the point is that, XMP equals higher CPU performance in gaming scenarios. This has been categorically proven now, and it's also on Intel, not just Ryzen. So yeah, use XMP would be my recommendation. Let's move on to the next question from Mendo Shutaro. Retro question for John. Do you consider plasma TVs to be viable for retro gaming? I'm thinking of the analog Mega SG / Super NT / Duo and old school systems via a Tink or Frame Master. Good CRTs are getting pretty expensive and screen sizes are small, but plasmas can be had for next to nothing now.
Ah, yes. I still have a plasma in my house today. The old Pioneer 2nd generation Kuro. But I like plasmas. I think they look awesome still today. But there is a big caveat here that's a little bit frustrating. These are still digital displays, right? So there is processing. And that doesn't mean it alters the image, but what it does mean is that there's input latency. And this is actually the same problem that late generation HD CRTs faced as well, because they were also processing the signal. And because plasmas, the years they were available widely, input latency wasn't looked after the same way it is today. So you're going to tend to get a little bit more on them than you would like. Like the Pioneer I have, for instance, is like 50 milliseconds of lag, which these days I would say isn't great. Like I do sometimes play games on there. I feel for modern games, it feels perfectly fine. For retro games, it feels okay enough. It looks really good, but obviously it's going to feel a little bit heavier than you might like, because you have 50 milliseconds of lag on the TV. If you're using, say, like one of these, well, I guess the analog stuff is pretty much like very low, like pretty much no lag, which is great. So the Retro Tink is also very low lag. FrameMeister adds like a frame or two, if I recall. So when you add it all up, you do end up with a slightly less responsive experience, but I do think it's worth seeking one out just to try it, because they are fairly cheap. And they can get really interesting too, because, and this one's a little tricky because the res is low, but Pioneer has an old 4:3 aspect ratio plasma from back in the day.
Yeah.
That's 640 by 480 pixels, I think. So if you plug like a VGA device, like a Dreamcast or a retro PC into that thing, you get this like gigantic 4:3 pixel perfect display.
What?
It's freaking
It's
cool
real?
as heck looking.
Never seen that.
Yeah, a friend of mine has one here, and it's just like, when you get up to sizes like 43 inch or larger and 4:3, it feels huge because it's so tall, right? A 43 inch 4:3 screen is gigantic, and they are awesome for specific use cases. It's a little bit tricky though with like, let's say you're using like a Tink and you want to run like a Super NES into it, because it's 256 by 224. It doesn't completely map pixel wise to a 640 by 480 display unless you're doing like this narrow aspect ratio. So you would end up with some more visible distortion because you have less pixels to work with, but still they're cool. But if you find a nice affordable 1080p plasma, and maybe some of the late Panasonic ones actually have lower input lag than the Pioneer, so it might be worth checking those out as well.
Okay.
But it's definitely worth looking at. They're cool displays.
I did chuckle when you mentioned how tall a 43-inch 4x3 screen is,
Yeah.
because I remember buying a 32-inch widescreen and thinking how small it was compared to my prior 4x3 screen.
Yep.
So it's like the reverse effect,
Yeah.
really. And it's the same thing happening now with ultra-wides. Oh, this 34-inch ultra-wide, that sounds pretty big. And then you see it, and it's just like a 27-inch screen that's wider.
Exactly. Yeah, I think people forget how big a large 4x3 display can be, especially if you go look at one of those old 4x3 rear projection TVs, like the 60-inch ones.
Yeah, they were nuts.
They're huge.
It's taller than me for sure. They're so big. It's fun.
Okay, let's move on to the next question. This one from Jamie Younger. One thing that hasn't been mentioned in Switch 2 chat is its lack of HDR, something that would make games like Splatoon and Kirby totally pop with a minimal performance impact. Why is it overlooked?
Cost.
Yeah, cost, but also cost in battery life as well.
Driving those nits.
Oh, it would be so cool though, because like they could do HDR on the display on the Switch, and then if you have it on your TV, you get to use it. Otherwise, they just run it in SDR. But like, it would let people experience HDR.
That'd be
Everyone,
cool. Yeah.
That would be great to democratize HDR, definitely. But all I can say is on my Mac, it's got brilliant HDR, but as soon as you run HDR content, battery life gets hammered. Now, admittedly, that is a much larger screen.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe they will do it.
I mean, what is it, an LCD? I wonder if like an OLED screen driving HDR would actually be more battery efficient, because it only uses more energy when it's like displaying
The full sprites. Yeah.
the bright parts of the image. I mean, if you were driving always an all white screen, then yeah, that's not great. But games aren't like that, right?
I think that would be a great idea then. But it would be cost, I guess.
Yeah,
I'd still be interested in seeing the battery life implications. Let's move on to the next question. We've got a few more to go through. This one from Crazy Joe. He's so crazy, the A in crazy is a 4.
Whoa!
Whoa!
This is the kind of out-of-the-box wacky thing.
His favorite game is Driver 3.
Yeah.
Hi guys, with the new generation of games still to come and the disappointing new GPU releases, aren't we in a spiral where studios are no longer able to realize their ambitions due to lack of skill and or hardware restrictions, and manufacturers don't deem it necessary to increase their products gen-on-gen performance and value due to software stagnation? What could be done to break this spiral? Alex, this is an interesting point, which I've never seen before.
He lives up to his name.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I was going to say his favorite favorite movie is Cradle to the Grave, by the way. If you've ever seen that joy of a film.
What about Boys to Men?
Boys to Men. Sorry. Where was I? Yeah, I don't think this is actually why. Because I think a lot of people are just really angry at Nvidia and partially at AMD for releasing the middle stack and low end stack GPUs currently with not a great, a great return of value like we've historically seen for such GPUs. And I think that's what Crazy Joe is getting at here. But I don't think it really has anything to do with software stagnation.
No,
there is cross-gen, but it's like going to be slowly going away, and we've seen games already being semi-ambitious in some aspects. Like, I didn't cover Hogwarts, but it was kind of nice to see them supporting high-end features like ray tracing and DLSS 3. And we're going to be seeing more UE5 titles coming up where the ambition is just completely limited by how much GPU you have and maybe CPU. In that aspect. So I don't think that's it. I think it's more of a hardware manufacturing IHV issue of, they're not offering super great returns there on those middle to low end cards. What do you think, Rich? I don't see a spiral.
Well, I think there's two things here. First of all, cross-gen has limited software ambition, right? Because you've got to support PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, but that is coming to an end now. And we've got Unreal Engine 5 coming, which I don't think you can level accusations of stagnation at, because it's massively ambitious.
Yeah.
Right. The hardware side of things, we're in a really difficult spot because, well, Nvidia want to preserve or possibly even increase their margins, while at the same time the cost of a wafer at TSMC has literally doubled. So that's what, those are reasons why we're getting what we're getting. At the lower end of the stack, for example, I mean, there's been a lot of discussion about the Radeon 7600 not being great compared to its prior generation predecessors. And of course there's a 4060 Ti, which was it was just really boring to actually review, because it's just like the same as the last generation with DLSS3 and better efficiency, and actually worse in some scenarios. It's just not great. The reason there, I think, is that the lower down the stack you get, your fixed costs don't really change. You still need a heatsink and fan. You still need at least 8 gigs of memory. Those are kind of fixed costs that you can't cost reduce in the way that the size of the silicon can potentially be cost reduced, or not in the case of this generation. I think there's a lot of exterior factors here, but I think on the plus side, 30 series was so far ahead of the consoles anyway at the higher end of the stack. And at least when you get to like 4070, it is notionally cheaper than the last gen at 3080, which is kind of like the only real sort of value, quote unquote, win that we've seen in the stack so far. I mean, the 4080 is just gigantically expensive. 4070 Ti was kind of, you pay more, you get more. 4070 was, okay, so you get more memory, you get DLSS3, you get the same performance. It's just kind of like a bit of a sideways step of a generation. We've seen it before with RTX 2000 with Turing cards, but obviously there was a cost implication for silicon that largely went unused for a lot of the first, generation of games there.
A year and a half almost.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't think it's really the reasons you've suggested there, but there's a whole bunch of surrounding reasons in both the software and the hardware space why we are where we are. You'd hope that as we move further away from this year, the cost side of things for the new process nodes will come down. And then hopefully we'll see something that we did actually see with the Turing generation, which is that the refresh cards were actually pretty good value.
Yeah.
All things
That'd
considered.
be so great if they had like a super line that was really good. Like if they rethought the 4060, for example, in a super variant. Oh, that'd be so good.
Wait,
yep.
Real quick, Rich. Breaking news. Well, not that breaking.
Okay.
The Seventh Guest is getting a VR remake.
Yeah, I saw that yesterday.
Why wasn't that on the list, man? I just had to mention. That's freaking cool.
Well, there's something else that wasn't on the list was the Meta Quest 3.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
That looks quite interesting, but, they didn't release any specifications.
We'll talk about that.
Isn't Bulletstorm also getting a VR?
Yeah, Bulletstorm as well.
Yeah.
They announced some bangers.
UE3, that's totally bizarre.
Crazy stuff. Let's move on to the next question from Mercer. He wrote,
Good day.
If a game is locked to 30 or 60 FPS, is there any benefit to having the console set to 120 Hz output? Is it possible for 120 Hz output to smooth out performance at the lower FPS? The mind/eyes may be experiencing the placebo effect in regards to Red Dead Redemption 2 at 30 or The Division 2 at 60, both on Series X. Those two games both felt or seemed more fluid with the console output set to 120. I'm aware that VRR is only able to kick in with 60 FPS in The Division 2. However, with Red Dead Redemption 2 being at 30, I'm not sure what's going on with the perceived feeling of increased fluidity.
Huh.
So, John, this is a double-edged sword, right? Because if you set your display to 120 Hertz, you should get lower latency, which might explain some of the things being seen here. But you also get a kind of double image effect.
That's correct, yeah. Which on a higher persistence display or just, a random LCD, if you're not using ultra low motion blur or something, you're going to get this sort of additional blurring as that extra frame sort of blends into the previous frame. So it kind of increases the level of motion blur, like not the good kind of motion blur, just persistence blur. You get additional blurring from the panel that doesn't look great. So I'm not a big fan of that. But at the same time, at least on the console side especially, you really need 120 hertz output is necessary for the full range of VRR. It's more limited on PS5 because the games have to specifically support that. But on Xbox too, if you try to run VRR in 60 hertz mode, the floor hits much earlier. You can really test this in Elden Ring in the quality mode, where in 120 hertz mode, it's perfectly smooth. But in 60 hertz mode, when it goes under 40 frames per second or so, you get judder again. So basically low frame rate compensation is not possible at that range. It doesn't seem to work. So I would use 120 when you need VRR. If you're not using it, I always just prefer to stick with 60 hertz output.
So one thing I would really love to see Xbox do is offer per game profiles for these things. Yeah. Because currently you have to always go in the menu.
Oh, dude, tell me about it. That's the one thing I really want them to fix is like, please let us just specify per game video settings or allow the game to control it, basically.
Yeah. I think interestingly enough, I haven't checked it out yet, but I think there's actually per game settings now, perhaps for refresh rate as well in the NVCP, if I recall. They just added it with the most recent update. I'll have to check that out.
Interesting. There is another benefit to running at 120. Games at 30 with bad frame pacing, inconsistent frame pacing, your window of variance changes from 16 milliseconds either side of 33 to 8. So it is smoother.
This is true.
We have proven that.
That is true.
I think we looked at that. What was it? Sekiro was where we
looked at that. Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm still not quite sure how Red Dead Redemption 2 is
it shouldn't
getting a perceived
it shouldn't
feeling
change, really.
Yeah. Let's move on to the final question. This one from Juan Casanovas. It's one for you, Alex. Do you think that Jensen's prophecy has been fulfilled? Are we going to wait for GT7 to jump to PC forever?
I think we need to wait for GT7 since that was on the list. And I'm still kind of holding out for the, what was it, BioShock RTX and Mirror's Edge RTX.
Oh, man, I want
those. Those were also there, if I recall. And those are like along with GT7, the three last, really most interesting things that were on that list that would be really cool to see. And I would really like to see Mirror's Edge because I think that game needs a revival anyway, just because it's really cool. Yeah, then I'll consider it fulfilled. And Jensen has spoken his word, etc.
Just to be clear here, just for everybody's
doesn't know
sort of, just understanding here, this is Alex's name for a GeForce Now leak that happened. Jensen is not responsible for this whatsoever.
No. This is just my silly pet name for it, which I use every single time I can. Yeah.
Although I do enjoy the imagery of maybe Jensen coming down from the mountain with a tablet.
Yeah.
It's got the name of all of these games that are coming to PC that haven't been announced.
This GT7's a weird one though. I think it will happen and it should. That would be awesome. But that's going to be a different port than a lot of these other Sony ports because it's a Japanese developed game by Polyphony Digital, no less.
Sure.
And I'm curious to see who's going to handle that and how.
I would hope they keep it in studio almost because they kind of like the control there, right? So
I know exactly. I feel like sending it out, like, let's say Nixxes got it. I think they could still do a good job, but like the extra layer of, challenge added by having to work with Polyphony on something like that seems like it would potentially cause problems. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, this is an interesting one, right? Because, when you think about the level of technical precision, fidelity, everything that Polyphony stands for, it's a match made in heaven with the PC platform.
Yeah, I know.
That's true.
And you can imagine that their technical guys would love the opportunity to take Gran Turismo to PC. But from a political standpoint, how much further do you want to push it? It's a tricky one, right? And, bearing in mind how closely associated Gran Turismo as a brand is with PlayStation, how far do you want to push it? How far can you push it?
I mean,
really interesting
dang,
stuff.
I would look at the very least. I would like to see them enable the ray tracing mode in the game.
Yeah.
Because, that seems like that should be fairly trivial to pull off, given that it's already in there. So, but yeah, I see what you mean about the politics. That could make a tricky situation.
So if I recall, before they showed off ray tracing in GT7 for the first time, didn't they do a tech demo using RTX PCs with Gran Turismo? Didn't they?
I don't remember.
Up? Tech demo ray tracing. I'm going to Google this.
I don't know. I can't remember. Are you Googling now
I'm
as we speak?
as we speak.
Okay. Do we need to provide covering commentary while you do your Googling?
I can't find it. No. Yeah, real-time ray tracing. Gran Turismo Tech Demo 2018.
Okay.
Apparently.
Tell us more.
I'm reading this from a website called GT Planet. I've never heard about this. Polyphony Digital Engineers did a tech presentation. Oh wait, no. This is about their baked lighting. This isn't real. Never mind. Because they used RT to do their baked lighting in the first GT Sport, right? So never mind. Forget it. Alex forgot something.
Fair enough. Well, we're still some way from Jensen's prophecy being fully fulfilled, but it sounds as though the remaining titles are really exciting. We'd like to see them, please.
Thinking of Jensen, though, I just had to comment. We've been talking a lot about AI. He's been talking a lot about AI. Jensen feels like the one man out of everybody on this planet that would be the first person to make the transition to a fully AI person. Leave the mortal coil behind and become
uploads
artificial,
himself,
right? Like he seems like the perfect candidate for it. Like he'll have like his digital leather jacket and everything, and
chibi avatar though.
Live in the cloud.
Yeah.
So,
wow, that's amazing, and I think it's a perfect point on which to end the show. So if you did enjoy the content, please do like, subscribe, share, and ring the bell for those notionally instant notifications. I'm now on, I think, week 3 of no notifications whatsoever, which is okay. Not as designed.
I need to fix that.
DF supporter program. Please do consider supporting us. Get involved. Join the brilliant community we've got. Contribute to this show. Lots of amazing bonus material and early access opportunities there. But that's all from us this week. See you next week.